Tick, tick, tick. It wasn't the sound of my clock that I heard. It was the sound of my metronome, reminding me that I had a cello lesson in 30 minutes. I had no idea how that lesson and the wonderful instructor I met that day would change my life. At first, I wasn't sure if Mr. Victoris Prizgintas, also known as Mr. P, my cello teacher, would be able to deal with my timid self. Standing at 6'2", he was an immense being in my little world. I remember it exactly, my very first lesson. I stepped out of the car, a little girl with a cello on my back, and stared at the 6 small steps which would lead me into my cello career. Once inside, I realized this is it, and it was time for me to begin playing. I was soon to understand that the world is full of opportunities, and that failure is not always bad. I learned all of this from Mr. P, a remarkable man who taught me about not just the cello, but life itself. After our first few lessons together, I proved that I was a student who could handle more challenges, and those challenges always began with Mr. P's teachings about the cello scales. He always told me, "Scales are going to be your #1 priority in learning the cello, and should be practiced before other pieces." At first, I would ignore what he said and skip to the fun, fast selections that we learned. Later, I would discover that the scales are key to everything. It's almost as if someone were writing the official guide to life. Well, scales are the official guide to the cello. When Mr. P knew that I did not practice the scales, he would place his head down and ask, "Do you know the story of the race between the turtle and the hare?" He used this analogy to show me that slow and steady always wins the race, and although scales may seem tedious, they will help better every other aspect of the music. In life, Mr. P taught me, it is most important to pace yourself, and practice can only make one better. The weekly lessons soon became permanent, and I continued to practice with Mr. P for the next 7 years. In these years, he became a very significant part of my life. He taught me not only how to read music, but he taught me all about myself. Through him, I was able to define character, responsibility, and respect, to name a few. He showed me that no one in the world is perfect, and that we can learn so much from our mistakes. Mistakes show the quality of a person and can lead to ideas. Also, Mr. P assured me that you can never reach high enough. I will never forget how he showed this to me, as well as my fellow orchestra members. It was the rehearsal right before an important concert at West Point Military Academy, and the orchestra did not sound the way he had hoped. Mr. P demanded that we put our bows down and stop playing. "I want to do an experiment," he said. "I want everyone to raise their hands as high as they possibly can." Of course, everyone looked at each other baffled. Then, we all raised our hands. He shook his head. "No, no, no, people. I'm positive that you can raise them higher." Once again, the orchestra sat puzzled. All of a sudden, Mr. P jumped up onto his chair and raised his hands. "This is reaching high," he said. "You need to break the seal and jump out of your comfort zone." Mr. P's orchestra, the Allegro Orchestra, began to experiment with rock bands and Irish folk bands. He wanted the orchestra to understand the world and how there are so many different people with different views, yet music is one of the things that the world has in common. Our performances with these different ensembles led the audience to believe that our group was ready for any challenge. Put us with bagpipe players or country singers. We were ready to show the world what we were made of. Because of Mr. P, I've become the person that I am today. I know that I will apply the lessons I've learned from him throughout the years of my life. Although he was my instructor, he understood me like no one else. And in addition to teaching, he gave me a friendship that I know I will never forget.